and I was trying to get back to my apartment in time. But
Hey guys, welcome back to Pistons Talk Podcast. Hope you guys are having a great Sunday. Are the Lions winning? Are
I think so.
Okay, yeah. Every time I check the score, I'm like, bad luck. I checked the score when they lost last week, and I was like, yeah, I'm never checking the score again. But Zar, welcome back to the podcast. Happy to have you, man.
Appreciate it as always. It's become a regular thing now. I really always enjoy coming on here, and always appreciate you reaching out and bringing me on.
And I appreciate you coming on, man. Like it's dog days of off season, got training camp coming up, preseason before you know it. So I'm excited. Basketball's almost back, but we're gonna have a good show. Should be really interesting. So with preseason coming up, I want to know what you'll be paying attention to. Just maybe storylines you're looking for. Maybe it's a JB Bickerstaff rotation, or maybe it's a player that you're looking out for.
Something I'll be paying attention to this season. I think it's kind of like a broad topic in general, but I would say like just overall the attitude of this team. I think that's the number one thing that I'm going to be paying attention to this season, and it's primarily just because like I can say this. Okay, everybody has seen the Pistons the last few years, right? It's not been a winning product or anything really resembling a winning product. However, um, prior to last year, the thing you could always like hang your hat on with this team was like, the fighting spirit, the competitiveness, all that. Like even if they did lose a lot of games, like a lot of them were really close. But last year was, I think, the first year I can remember where it truly felt like everyone really like gave up, and that's saying a lot for having a season the year before where you won 17 games. But last season really felt like a lot of people gave up, and there was so much roster movement that like by the end of the season, the guys giving up weren't even on the team in like December, January. It was a completely different team. I'm really looking for an identity. That's the number one thing I'm looking for this year. I want to see the blueprint at the very least of what a winning Detroit Pistons basketball product looks like. I think JB has emphasized that since getting here, that he keeps repeating this phrase like when you tune in March or February, you can tune in on any given night and you're going to know that you're going to see a product that resembles what you think of when you think of Detroit Pistons basketball. And I think that's not something to just like cough at, it's not something to just disregard because this team hasn't really had much of an identity in recent years, especially last year with the amount of things going on with, like Monty, with Troy, like just the roster and movement in general, and just like the losing streak taking on a life of its own. I think this year seeing a sort of attitude change where they come out looking hungry every game versus maybe the first 3-4 games of the season um is going to be a big thing. I really want to see this team do more than just be competitive most of the time. I want to see 4 quarters of consistent basketball, and I think that should be the goal.
Yeah, I think a lot of the points you made, like when Dwayne Casey was here, to your point, like they might have not won a whole lot of games after, they started rebuilding, quote unquote. But they were competitive for the most part. Like last year, I think they were competitive like during the Dan Burke era, which was like what, 4 games, and everyone
Yeah.
was like sky high. And after that, the shit hit the fan, and like no one was competitive. People weren't trying. And to your point, like last year, I think it kind of just scrambled a lot of people's brains because a lot of people last year were really high on the Pistons. They thought they could take a step, getting Monty Williams, all that stuff. I'm not gonna like go down memory lane, but
Right.
I honestly think that what I'm looking for this season is more of a consistent rotations. No more all bench units, please. And no more 2 big lineups. I've seen enough. Like those are the 2 things like I just don't want to see anymore.
Yeah, I think if you do see anything with a 2 big lineup, I think it's going to be 2 bigs that can stretch the floor. Looking at like a Paul Reed, Isaiah Stewart, combo off the bench. But I think probably, yeah, you're going to see a lot less of those minutes. But you never know. I mean, JB did use Evan Mobley and Jared Allen together for the last few years, so I can't rule it out.
I know.
And honestly, okay, hot take about the two bigs thing. And I might become the least popular person in the comment section for this. So far, this is not me saying anything definitive. This is not even me saying anything negative. But so far, I feel the two bigs, the dog pound, Isaiah Stewart, Jalen Duren, have had a more positive impact and consistent impact on the Pistons than the Cade Ivey backcourt has so far. And that sounds crazy to say, but when Stewart and Duren are out there together, I think, yeah, you can chalk up problems in terms of spacing, absolutely. But interior defense, like the interior presence, when they're on is like undeniable, right? I remember being very impressed when they first started rolling out those lineups. I think Casey's last year. I think it was mostly in the second half of the season. I didn't honestly ever really have that big of a problem with the two bigs. I think it was what they surrounded them with, and how it was used. Because like we saw with Cleveland, obviously they're not Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, but that's not to say it can't work. I just think there wasn't a lot of offensive creativity and there wasn't a lot of consistency in how things were, done. And I think that's also part of the reason why Cade and Ivy haven't like popped as the backcourt that everyone, including myself, pegs them to be. I think they can, but I think it's just been a lack of creativity offensively through schemes thus far.
Yeah, that's definitely a take. I think my only issue with the two big lineups, and I think you do make some valid points, like a debate and an argument towards it, is my thing is there's not really a vocal leader on the defensive end where if I turn on a game, man, I don't hear anybody talking. There's no communication. Like, I want Jalen Duren. I know this is something going off topic and I love it. I want Jalen Duren to be a vocal like anchor. I want him to, call out, plays. I want him to say weak side, whatever. Like, be that vocal leader this season, because when you do that, you're helping out the whole starting five, not just yourself. Like, he's the last line of defense. That's something I want to see him do more this season.
Yeah, I think Duren, and I think I've said this before, but I really do think Duren taking that defensive leap is really the key to the Pistons unlocking whatever it is they want to achieve this season in terms of winning. Because if he's not your anchor defensively, in the paint, and around the basket, you have no hope really. Like everything kind of hinges on his progress and effort defensively, and being vocal is absolutely a part of that. And that's also something that I think has plagued the Pistons the last few years, is there's not a lot of talking. Like, you can, as a person watching even on TV, you can see, there's not a lot of talking on the court. And I think that's something that JB, being a defensive minded coach, will come in and hopefully address. But I think assumptions with coaches I can't really do anymore.
Yeah.
after
No,
last year. So.
I'm not gonna put you in that spot, man. But I do want to stay on coaches. And I want to know how you feel with JB. Like, what are you hoping to see from him this not only this preseason, but this season? Is it maybe it's a rotation? Maybe it's a certain player you're hoping that could, untap their potential.
I have a couple answers.
Okay.
One being how specifically he values spacing. And spacing to people always, I think everyone just thinks of perimeter shooting, which obviously plays a massive factor when it comes to spacing, but it's not the only type of spacing. Spacing is where you are on the court. Spacing is how you use certain players to maximize their offensive skill set. Looking even at like someone like an Asar Thompson, not putting him in the corner and maybe having him play the dunker spot, like things like that, where he can be kind of this free flowing engine of secondary creation, where you use his offensive rebounding to your advantage, things like that. I think are really interesting. So I'm really interested to see how he values spacing, what he uses a guy like Malik Beasley in. Like, I think with the last, even Monty and Casey, like a lot of times it felt like there was one guy who could shoot at a time. And that was the reason why the too big thing didn't work. Now, if you rolled up a lineup where it was Cade, you could even use this year's roster, like Cade, Beasley, Fontecchio, Stewart, Duran. You can't tell me that can't work. I feel like it could. Now, that's not me saying I think that's what the lineup should ever be. I don't think power forward is Isaiah Stewart's best position. I really hope people don't take it that way. I'm just saying I don't think it was as big of a flaw as it's made out to be. I think it just kind of ended up being the what's the word I'm looking for here? Whatever. It got a lot of the blame when it didn't need to. But I think spacing is really like a big thing. You have the most shooters that the Pistons have had in recent memory on this team. How are you going to use them? And you also have guys who are not really shooters, like an Asar Thompson, a Jalen Duran, even a Ron Holland to a less extent. Like those are all guys that you have to kind of scheme with that, like, okay, how are we going to use them so they're not a liability? So I think those are definitely things I'm looking for. And I think the biggest thing I'm looking for from JB, and this has nothing to do with even like just the on the court product. I want to see some passion.
Yeah.
I would like to see, and I've already seen it thus far, but I would like to see a coach whose words matches the actions. Like I want to see someone who gets fired up when, his players, there's a missed call, you know what I mean? Or like
Yeah.
he sees someone who's not, I don't want to, I don't want to,
I'll
shit on
say it for
anybody.
you. I'll say
Yeah.
it for you. You don't want him going in a press conference saying one thing and then his actions just don't meet anything on the court. Like one coach, Stan Van Gundy, would go in a press conference, tell you that was bullshit, and then he would go on a ref, and you could visibly hear him, and you could hear him like that's bullshit. Like I get what you're saying. You want JB to kind of be just match that energy 100%. Just don't kind of like put on a face because the cameras are like right in front of you.
Absolutely. And I want to see JB be the type of guy. I want to see JB be a player's coach. I really want to see that happen where I feel like this team hasn't had much. I've obviously on the court identity, but even it seems like off the court identity. Like it doesn't seem like it's been a type of team where you could look at like an OKC, the last few years where like they all have bonded together. Like they're the most online team I think I've ever seen, but they all get along great and they're all rooting for each other always. And there's this great sense of camaraderie and brotherhood that they have. That's not to say the Pistons locker room has, had issues or anything like that, but it just hasn't really, they haven't had an identity. They haven't had a coach that they can kind of rally around as well. And I really am hoping to see JB be that because he was that in Cleveland. And I really want to see the Pistons have something like that because I think once you start having those types of camaraderie, brotherhood, like, it's ironic because with the Monty, the talk was always like, he's going to give you a speech on how to be a man. And that was like the memes like Suns fans would say when he got hired, like, oh yeah, he's going to give a lot of great speeches about being a man. But like, I think truly the off the court stuff plays a much bigger role on the court than a lot of people realize. So I really want to see this team kind of form an identity.
Yeah, I think forming an identity is so crucial because anytime we've had coaches over the coaching doing the press conferences when they first get hired, like they always try to pay homage to the going to work Pistons, the bad boys. But like we're in 2024, you can't tackle people, you can't hand check. Like you're gonna have to find new creative ways and create a brand new culture. You can still be defensive minded, but you have to find new creative ways of building that culture. And to your point, you said earlier, like there hasn't really been a culture with the Detroit Pistons, and it seems like 10 years.
Yeah, and that's really pushing it because 10 years ago that was what 2016 or no, sorry, 2014, like the 2014-15 season, and then the playoff appearance closest to that was the 2016 season.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if we could really say that was like a culture or identity. It was maybe like the beginning of something, but then it ended up really not going anywhere. And Stan was out the door a couple years later. Honestly, we're getting close to 20 years.
Yeah.
Without the Pistons really having some serious identity that isn't just talk. Like it's like identity doesn't mean like it's something we just keep saying. Identity is something you can see and recognize, regardless of, even if you are a Pistons fan or a person that watches the Pistons a lot, an identity is something that you can tune in once and know, okay, this is like what they are about. And I think we're going on 20 years since that.
Yeah, I was being kind of nice. 10 years. I was like 2014. I mean, that was Josh Smith, like KCP,
Yeah.
Andre Drummond, Greg Monroe. I mean, like our identity was we're gonna just have three guys that are 6'10" and just crash the boards. And they were a 2K cheat team. You just have Brandon Jennings chucking up threes, and you got like three guys that are like 7 foot just grabbing rebounds.
Andre Drummond, my league legend, I should say.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I have not like played 2K in the longest time, even though I bought it. I bought a brand new PS5, have not opened it yet, and I bought 2K, so I've not opened it or downloaded it. I've just been so damn busy.
Man, I bought NBA 2K25 and I have played it like legitimately, I want to say 3 times. And that's like really a stretch. I'm cooked. I'm washed officially.
2K17 was my favorite, but I mean, man, Ronnie keeps running the game. I swear.
I could do a whole video essay on like microtransactions and all that stuff, like how it's ruined the love of sports games, because sports games just used to be like, sit down with your buddies and couch co-op, you know what I mean, or like play against each other. And now it's guys dedicating their entire lives to their my player just to spend double the amount of money next year. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to roast my friend, but he's so damn into it that he literally stands for the national anthem. When he's, I was like, bro, you're not in the game. He's like, bro, I spent over $100. I'm a 99 overall. I'm like, bro, you need to get a life. That's ridiculous. I do want to transition. There was an article this past week from the good people over at Bleacher Report, and they had a most desirable trade asset. So I'll name you the most desirable trade assets, and then you tell me what you think of it. So they had Jalen Duren, Jaden Ivey, and Asar Thompson as the most desirable trade assets. And the untouchables were Cade Cunningham and Ron Holland, which kind of weird, kind of interesting. I kind of want to get like your thoughts on it, just their opinion in terms of just like a trade asset. Do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? There's someone that you would actually make untouchable outside of Cade and Ron Holland?
It's okay. When you win 12 games, and I want people to understand this, and this isn't an indictment on the players or anything like that. It's more so just how basketball and sports work. When you win 12 games on, what was this, year 3, year 4 of a rebuild, like officially, like technically they've been, rebuilding since like that 2019-20 season, but people don't count that. So whatever. When you're in year 4 and you win 12 games and you break the losing streak record, in my opinion, in terms of true untouchables, you have none. That's not to say Cade Cunningham should ever get his name put in trade discussions. Absolutely not. But when you say the word untouchable, I can only think of like a handful of players in the NBA who are truly like untouchable. Like Victor Wembanyama, one of the true only untouchables. Giannis Antetokounmpo, you could say he's an untouchable, but I think at this point, like another Bucks, season, that's not to say that I think they're going to look to trade him, but he could definitely look to be traded, and that officially makes him not untouchable. Even like a Luka, like you could say is untouchable. Kevin Durant's not untouchable at this point in his career. Like I think the term untouchable is so loosely thrown around when it's only applicable to really like a handful of players. So to say that Ron Holland is an untouchable player for the Detroit Pistons at this point seems kind of silly. I don't think so. That's not to say, again, I think he should have his name thrown in trade discussions, because I think, like we talked about in the last podcast, I think his potential is immense. But in terms of untouchables, if the Pistons had one, it's Cade. But that's it. In terms of desirable trade assets, yeah, I think Duren is a desire. I can see a lot of teams going for a Jalen Duren. Jaden Ivey in the same sense. I can look at a team like Brooklyn, who is currently who's their starting. They have Killian Hayes on their roster. and the
They're
point guard
tanking,
position.
tanking.
They're tanking, but a guy like Jaden Ivey, as a point guard for them, kind of solves a lot of issues in the short and long term because that's someone you can still make a long term bet on. Um, same with like if the Clippers, let's say, were to rebuild, they would definitely love a Jaden Ivey, right? Like they would go for a Jaden Ivey in a heartbeat. Do they have the assets for it? No, not really. But they would love to go for Jaden Ivey. So yeah, those are two players that I absolutely think are desirable. Was there another one you mentioned?
They had a Sart Thompson in there
Asar
as
as
well.
well. Yeah, okay. Asar again. Like I think of the three, I would say Asar is probably the most desirable trade asset for any team. Again, I don't think any of these three players are being traded anytime soon. But I would say Asar is definitely the most desirable for other teams just because of the amount he can do already that's bankable. He has a extremely bankable skill with his defense that playoff teams really, really desperately need. Not to say he would start on most playoff teams, but he would absolutely be an important player on a lot of playoff teams because of his defense and because of his offensive and defensive rebounding. And he also is still a creative offensive player in terms of playmaking, and also playmaking for himself, like off the
Hmm.
ball. I think he's one of the best off the ball players from his class as a whole. I think if you, not to say anyone should do this, but if you were to rewatch a Pistons game from last year, and let's say like maybe in the early part of the season, watch how Asar Thompson moves around the court, especially in those first 3 or 4 games when he was allowed to be a little more of like a creative player. Watch how he moves because it's genuinely like he's here, he's there, and then the next thing you know, he's on the other side of the court guarding their best player. Like it's really impressive what Asar Thompson has been able to do, and I think of the three, he'd be the most desirable.
I agree with you. I think he actually has the highest value in this list that Bleacher Report had. Like to me, if you were to swap him, and I'm not comparing Asar to this player, but he's just always like the contenders always love this guy 3 and D. Like if you put him in a PJ Tucker role, you can't tell me, or a Bruce Brown role, you cannot tell me he wouldn't flourish. Like imagine if hypothetically Asar was in Denver, like that would be nasty. Like I don't want to see that, obviously, but like he's just the type of player, like you mentioned, like a lot of contenders would love him. I think even tanking teams would love him because he does so much things that where you're like, wow, this guy's like borderline, elite defensively. He can really run the floor. He can out jump a 7-footer, like we've seen it, and it's crazy how high his potential is. And if he develops a jump shot, then you have a two-way guy that you could pair next to Cade. Which, for the untouchables, you're right. You won 14 games. No one's untouchable. Everyone has an asking price, and I'm sure the Pistons get calls about Cade all the time, and they're not gonna obviously like tell us what those traits are, but I do kind of think it's silly to have guys untouchable when that was a really bad team last year.
Yeah, like I just obviously Cade is a guy that you're not going to even really think about trading, right? But that's also just when you say the word untouchable, it's just you can't really. Now, if they go ahead and make an insane jump this year where they're all of a sudden in a play-in spot, then yeah, you can start putting Cade in those untouchable conversations. But until then, no.
Yeah, it gets thrown out way too casually. That and generational, I think they get thrown out
Agreed.
way too casually by media companies like Bleacher Report and others. So a lot of publications have been doing their top 100 list. So Hoopsite did their top 100 players in the NBA. If you guys haven't seen it, definitely go check it out. Really good article by them. Now we had 2 Detroit Pistons actually make the list. Tobias Harris came in at 90, and Cade Cunningham came in at 37. So, what is your reaction to both of those rankings?
I think Tobias is, I would say he's a top 100 player. I feel like 90 is a little harsh, but I would say yeah, he's absolutely a still, like, in my opinion, Tobias has become incredibly underrated as a player just because of the fact that like everyone has made a joke out of Tobias, right? Like the whole crumble cookie thing, the amount of hatred he got from Philadelphia 76ers fans in the last few years. And when you think about it, like he didn't really do anything to receive this hatred. He just didn't live up to the contract he was given, and that's not his fault. If you want to be mad at somebody, be mad at Daryl Morey for not trading him sooner, or be mad at it was Elton Brand before him.
I don't even know. I mean,
Be mad at the Philadelphia 76ers. Don't be mad at Tobias Harris is my point. And I think he's someone who I think this year, and we talked about this as well. Like I think he's going to be someone that makes a kind of bounce back year, not necessarily even in terms of production, but just in terms of how he's viewed. So I think by the end of the year, going into next year, I think Tobias will be a little bit higher in this ranking. And then the same goes for Cade Cunningham. 34. If you told me in 2021, when the Pistons won the draft lottery, that Cade Cunningham would be ranked as the 34th best player in the NBA going into year 4, I would have thought something went wrong. And that's not to say being ranked 34th in the NBA is a bad thing. That's incredibly impressive, right? But Cade Cunningham is a guy who should be seen as like a top 15 player in the NBA. When you go number 1, especially in the class that he went, those are the expectations you're like placed on. The unfortunate part is that the Pistons have made him becoming this top 15 player in the NBA incredibly difficult ever since he has put on that hat. He has probably had the most adversity of any number 1 pick in recent memory in the NBA. I feel like his situation is almost comparable to that of like Bryce Young in Carolina. If there's any NFL fans out there, now granted he produced a lot better than Bryce Young has thus far in his career, but in terms of situation, I feel like that's really the only thing comparable right now. Just because I feel like he hasn't really been placed in a position where the team is prioritizing his development. It's interesting, and I feel like there was this overlap with Cade and Blake, where Blake kind of was put in this position when he was on the Detroit Pistons. Blake Griffin, when he was on the Pistons, he was put in this position as being the guy, right? And like whatever else the roster is, we'll just figure it out because we have the guy here. Blake's just going to like carry us once again to the playoffs like he used to. And I think that expectation was taken from Blake, and then literal like 6-8 months later put on Cade Cunningham the minute he got here as like, okay, now you're the guy. The team is what the team is, but you know, you'll get us to the promised land. And I feel like that's been incredibly unfair to Cade, because I think he's someone who, if they had prioritized his development, I think this is truly like the best year to show this. And I think going into next season, I can't see why he isn't seen as a top 15 guy in the NBA. Because this year, like, not to say he has some type of God squad around him, but he has a team that fits his play style, and that a team that fits, you know, his development, a team that like he can kick it out to any player if this is done right on the court, and they can, you know, play their role correctly versus, you know, playing guys out of position and playing all bench lineups and all those other things that I've heard a million times. So I think these are 2 good rankings, and I would be surprised if Jalen Duren also by next year isn't in these discussions as well.
Yeah, if he's not, then something went horribly wrong this season. But I think the bias is more of a stain, to your point, of just like the underperforming in Philly, and that has more to do with the pieces like surrounding Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey more than it has to do with than Tobias. Because to your point, I think he's actually going to perform higher because there's no expectations on him, you know, competing and winning like a playoff series. I mean, if the Pistons make the playoffs, I will be the happiest individual right now. I'm sure you would be too. But I'm not expecting Tobias to come in and average 25 points and lead this team to the playoffs. I'm just expecting him to be a secondary option with Cade Cunningham, seeing how they can click, seeing how a power forward of his status does next to Cade. And, you know, I think the ranking's fair. Now, being ranked 30th, I don't really think it's actually that bad considering the season they had, because, you know, someone could say, yeah, maybe he's a top 50 player, like maybe. But, you know, some of these, you know, journalists can be a little bit rough. I think if he gets to a top 25 player this season, then I think the Pistons made the plan. Like if he can get to a top 25 status, it's telling me he may make the All-Star team. This team is going in the right direction. I think top 15, man, like if he's top 15, like I'm running through a brick wall. If he's top 15, I mean, he's kind of like seen in the same light as the guys that have next. And I did look, Scotty Barnes was actually ranked higher than Cade in this ranking by Hoops Hype. So if you want to put, I know there's, Pistons fans that kind of still salty about Rookie of the Year stuff, but I mean, hey, that's not me at all.
Okay, do you think Tyrese Halliburton is a top 15 player in the NBA right now?
I do.
I can't see why Cade Cunningham can't be in that position. And that's me being a big Tyrese Halliburton fan. I think Cade's a better prospect. And I think he hasn't, and I don't think he should have been placed as a top 15 player. Let me make that completely clear. He should not have been placed as a top 15 player coming into the season. But going into his career, back in 2021 when we got drafted, I thought by now absolutely he would be, seen in those types of lights. And I can't blame him really for it because like I said, he's been in that type of position where he hasn't been in a position where Indiana is going out and, getting a team around him that really makes a lot of basketball sense. And they, go out and go get an all-star level player like a Pascal Siakam, to play next to him. Or even in Sacramento, granted that didn't work ultimately, but it was such a short period of time. He still did more winning in Sacramento than Cade Cunningham has at any point in his career thus far. So to me, I don't see why Cade can't be in those Halliburton discussions. Or even in my opinion, I can't see why maybe not going into next year, but eventually I don't know why he can't be seen in the same light that Shea is,
I get what you're saying, in terms of a prospect, a player. I agree with you. I just, to your point, I'm agreeing with you as well. It's the roster construction and what the front office put around him, because his rookie year, you're like, yeah, 20 wins. They should probably be a playoff team by now going into year 4, but that just was not the case. The roster's actually got worse somehow, which is, it's such a head scratcher. The whole Troy Weaver era, to me, I swear I could just do a podcast of where it went wrong and why it went wrong, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, I do agree with you. He has all the tools to be in that conversation as a Shea, being a top 15 player. I'm not really questioning his ability whatsoever. I just kind of question, previous regimes of how they've built around him. I don't really know what the master plan was, but it obviously failed.
Yeah, and that's putting it lightly. Failing failing would be in my opinion, because it's just so interesting. I've been doing a lot of thinking of where the Pistons discourse was around draft time 2021 to where we are now. The Pistons were seen as the best young core in the NBA by a lot of people, and to now being seen as a joke by a lot of people is really sad. And it bothers me because I feel like this team had such a linear path towards being even at absolute worst, where a Toronto is right now, or even obviously Orlando's been, on this amazing trajectory last season, but I really saw the Pistons being in that position and it just hasn't worked out. So it's really interesting, we talk about regimes where Trajan is going to take this.
Yeah, I have more confidence in him, and I don't know if it's blind faith, just because he says all the right things and he's really calculated. I hope he's the right man for the job, because I don't want to be, as a fan, making videos about, okay, who's going to be the next GM in 4 years? It's just a never ending cycle. One of these guys has to stick, build something and, have us fans actually excited to talk about this team and find positives each and every week, because doing a podcast all last year, man, I was throwing shit at the wall, hoping it stuck, and it didn't. Oh man, but I hope Trajan is the right man for the job. I did want to talk to you about the new city jerseys. Now, I've actually called them the Cade OSUs. because that's
Mhm.
what they look like to me. But what are your thoughts on these new Detroit Piston City jerseys?
Um, well, they are basically just a color swap of last year's Bad Boys uniforms, which I also thought were OSU inspired as well. Um, but for some reason, to me, these look way cleaner than last year's black. And I was a fan of the Bad Boys uniforms last year, but these look so much cleaner. I think these might be. I would put these and the red ones that they wore in 2021-22. Those I think are the best uniforms. This might be a hot take outside of the teal, because I know there's a lot of divisiveness about the teal. I think the teal by far is the best uniform the Pistons have ever had, in terms of just cool factor, right? Like what a
Yeah.
jersey just looks cool. The teal's the best. Then I'd put the maroon version. Any actually, I'm gonna put any variation of that era as number one. This might be number two. This might be number two, or the red one from 2021-22 might be number two for me. Just because like it has a level of like, I wouldn't, not to say I would be, out wearing jerseys in public. That's just not my thing. But if I were, I would want it to look like this. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of
Mhm.
jerseys that people just wear because it's a favorite team, favorite player. This is just a cool looking jersey. It's rare that these, because Nike puts out these city edition uniforms every year, and there's always like a lot of ones that you're like, is it really? You know what I mean? Like in my opinion, the 2020-21, those like dark blue Motor City jerseys they had with like did they have like the red stripe down the middle,
The
the
gray
red
stripe
racing
ones
stripe?
or the blue ones?
It was the one where it had like, it looked like the Denver jerseys where it had like the circle in the middle. They put
Mhm.
out the promo pics and like Blake looked incredibly sad in the
Yeah.
pictures. I think those were the worst they have done by far. But then, every now and then you get a jersey like this that looks, great. I just hope for once. I think the Pistons have honestly been on a great stretch with it when it comes to jerseys. I thought the Saint Cecilias were clean. They brought back the teal uniforms. I thought the statement uniforms that they wear, like the black, blue, and red. Some people don't like them. I like them. I think those are clean. I think the Bad Boys uniforms were clean. This is probably my favorite. But with that being said, make it mean something. It's about
Yeah.
time they have these cool jerseys that like, everybody's like, "Oh, this looks really cool," and we'll get a great mock-up like this. And then they wear them, and it's like Wednesday evening in December, and they're losing to like the Cleveland Cavaliers by like 15 to 20 points, and the season's already over, and we're not even in January yet. Um, I think this is the year where hopefully by the end of the year, this jersey has some fond memories attached to it, because I think the fans really deserve it by now.
I can't remember. It's a really good follow on Twitter. I think it's called the Piston Tracker Uniform, and like he actually had the records attached to the win loss record, which I think is so cool that he actually like takes the time to actually tell you um the records. Apparently the roads, we won more games in the road blues than we did anything else. I think the Pepsi Max or the Blue Lives Matter jersey you were talking about. That's what I call them. My neighbor actually calls them the Blue Lives Matter because he's like, dude, this looks like a police car. I was like, you're not wrong, man. Like, I like them though. I think they're simplistic. I think sometimes less is more. I don't mind that they're just kind of like a reverse of the Bad Boys from last year. I just called McKay OSU because it's damn near identical. These are a little bit like cream. They're not white like Cade's Oklahoma State jersey. But hey, man, maybe he can get back to his college form. And college Cade was a must watch, if you ask me.
Talk about generational. That's I think Cade was one of those dudes, truly, and I think he still is. Because the fact that he is still now in a position where a year or 2 years from now, him making an All NBA team is not really out of the question, despite having probably, I call the last few years of his career an origin story. Truly, like and I'm sure we could actually use this to roll into that topic if you want to go into it. Um, I'll save my thoughts actually, but yeah.
I mean, we could talk about that, or we could talk about the leaked court. I mean, you're the guest. You
Oh
tell
yeah,
me.
yeah. Let's do the court real quick.
All right, we'll do the court real quick. So this was actually leaked from 2K, I guess. Here's my question. Are they gonna wear the statement red, blue, and black jerseys? Are they gonna, because sometimes last year, like, they matched, right? Like, are they gonna wear the Jordan jerseys that are Jordan branded with this court, you think?
I would assume so, especially because they have the blue and red stripes down in the corner as well, and the
Yeah.
313 logo in the middle, which I know they use for the statement editions. That being said, I think it also works if you wear the white uniforms on this. The blue, I feel like would be overkill. Just because it would maybe blend in a little too much for my liking, and maybe I'm an old man for that. But I think the white and the black uniforms would look great on this court. And I think compared to last year, I wasn't a huge fan of last year's court. Not because of the design. I just thought the gray kind of looked like very NBA 2K-ish, ironically.
Yeah.
Um, it was just it's not a color that pops. This pops for me, and hopefully, with the same I said with the City Edition jerseys, hopefully these have some memories attached to them because I remember watching like any other in season tournament game last year, and it really felt like a meaningful basketball game. And then you would tune into Bally Sports Detroit, or in my case, like be there covering the game, and it just feels like Wednesday. Like it doesn't it didn't feel special. So hopefully like this is a year where the Pistons can make these games important.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't a fan. I've been really against the just the in-season tournament. I think it's kind of a waste of people's time because there's like no benefit to like actually playing it. I mean, want to get wild, like have lottery implications to it. Like you win it, you jump a team in the lottery or something like that. Something fun, like something to like where, to your point, like it's just a Wednesday night. Like if I know the Pistons have a higher chance of getting a draft pick and they win the in-season tournament, I think a lot of like teams would probably be playing to try to get a top pick. I think it would be more fun that way.
I think even having it count as an extra regular season win, if you win the
Yeah,
championship, is a huge thing because that makes a huge difference when it comes to standings. Like ideally, like it means like, oh, you get like a guaranteed play-in spot, but like okay, like let's say like you suck for the rest of the season, like now you're in the play-in. I feel like that's unfair. But even saying like, having an extra regular season game count for you makes genuinely a season's worth of difference. So I think there's a lot of potential with the in-season tournament. I just think like right now it's just like a concept rather than like an actual thing. Like sure, the players getting money is cool and all, but I think I think I'm confident in the NBA actually adding some implications to this because I know they're aware of the criticism. Um, I think once they start giving these games and the tournament as a whole, like meaning that, like, hey, if you win this, you get an extra regular season win, or if you win this, you get, an extra, like you jump a spot in the lottery or something
yeah,
like that. Yeah. I think those types of things will make this tournament a lot more interesting because, like, I mean, you and I both have used wrestling analogies in the past. Like to me, the end season tournament, I initially said it was like the Intercontinental Championship, where like you win it and it's cool that you won it and it's something you can say, oh, I won this, and like it's kind of a stepping stone type of thing. I think I look at it more now as kind of like the King of the Ring almost, where it's a great thing to have on your resume hypothetically, but it doesn't actually mean anything. But the thing that WWE did, and for those who aren't wrestling fans, don't worry, stay with me. The thing that WWE did the last year, they have this tournament called the King of the Ring, but in the past, all the winner got was like a crown and being able to call themselves King of the Ring, which is basically what the in-season tournament is. This year, however, they changed it to where if you win the tournament, you get, a championship opportunity at SummerSlam, which is a big pay-per-view. Giving that some sort of meaning has elevated the King of the Ring into being actually meaningful. So I think if they give this some sort of meaning, it goes from okay, tournament that's like great for TV to tournament that actually has real implications.
yeah. I mean, I'd love to see the in-season tournament more like Money in the Bank, personally.
Or that.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't
like,
know how you implement that in the basketball sense.
I don't know, man. Maybe, fifth and sixth seed implications, like make them
Okay.
play a little playoff series, like a 2-game series or something like that. I don't know, something fun,
Yeah.
something wacky. But I doubt I doubt they would do anything that crazy. But hopefully, it's a little bit more serious. And don't hang a banner if you win it. Like I saw the Lakers hang a banner. It's not something you hang a banner to. Like just put it in the locker room or something like that. Like Lakers, like yeah, we won a championship this year. It's like no, you won an in-season tournament.
I'm counting that as Bron's fifth ring. I don't care.
All right, man. We'll count it.
I'm using that in GOAT debates.
All right, you do that, man. I can't even have those debates because it's just like gets so toxic. I was like, you know what? I ain't trying to like be on the news. Like, I'm sure you probably saw an article that like some LeBron fan killed a Jordan fan because that's how bad.
No.
Yeah, like he stabbed him.
Oh my God, I had no idea about this.
Yeah, hopefully YouTube doesn't take this down. Apparently, like he stabbed him. I remember reading the article like when I was in high school. Like he got stabbed to death like 47 times.
Jeez, I don't take them that serious. I don't think I'd ever take anything basketball related that seriously. That's insane. Wow.
Yeah, I mean it's almost as crazy as the NFL Discord channel. But I mean, hey,
yeah.
I'm happy the NBA doesn't do that. We're just gonna go to the Zach Lowe stuff. And I'm going to play it for people that haven't seen or haven't heard it. This was Zach Lowe's comments about Cade Cunningham as a player.
I am in on Cade Cunningham. I am not in on Cade Cunningham as like super duper star, first team All NBA guy. Don't get me wrong. But he got buried early. And I'm in on him to like, if he made the All-Star team this year, I wouldn't be surprised. If you set the over-under on 2.5 career All-Star appearances, I'm taking the over. On Cade Cunningham All-Star appearance. Like I think he's going to be a really good NBA player. The question is just everything around him.
So I know you want to kind of like go in on just because I saw a lot of people this past week talk about it. It was just Cade discourse, and I love Cade discourse, and we're not even into the season yet, so it got me excited. But what are your thoughts on Zach Lowe's comments about Cade Cunningham?
Zach Lowe has always seen the vision, I think. I remember him doing an interview with Cade, I think after his rookie season, that I thought was great, and you could really see he understood Cade's game. My take on this has nothing to do with what Zach Lowe said. I am in 100% agreement. I think I completely see where he's coming from, and I'm with him on that. I'm going to pull up a tweet of my own that I saw, and it was something I just thought was interesting because it's really reflective of a lot of the Cade discourse. And it's this. He goes, excuse me.
You're all
horrible
good,
podcasting on my side. Zach Lowe saying he's, quote, taking the over on 2.5 career All-Star appearances for Cade. And then it's this meme that says 555, come on now. And then he goes on to say, this is what drives me insane about the Cade talk. He's a fine player, a perfectly good starting point guard. In 2017, yeah, he probably gets a couple, but run through the list of guys now, to say nothing of who gets traded or drafted into the conference. I think part of him being saddled with the baggage of being a number one pick, and partly that people look back, i.e. Bradley Beal made All-Star games and they are similar caliber players, when the level of talent has, all caps, rapidly risen over the last decade. Zach should know this. And this is coming from an account called NBA Baby Secret, who has 6.2 thousand followers, and strikes me as someone who I use the term galaxy brain, is one of those people who have to feel a lot smarter in order to make themselves feel important. I'm not shitting on this person, but that was a horrible take, in my opinion. And it's really striking because I think a lot of the discourse on Cade is really similar to that, where they go, oh, like because of where his career is. And, I think the whole if this was 2017, Cade Cunningham would make a few All-Star appearances. I'm sorry. If this was 2017 and you put Cade Cunningham onto the 2016-17 Detroit Pistons, even, he would be seen as one of the best players in the NBA. You will put a 6'7", 6'8" point guard Who knows, right? Like he started and came in the league 6'9", whatever. But you
It's a
put a
shapeshifter.
6'7". Yes, I'll say 6'7". I feel like 6'6" is undershooting it. I'll say 6'7" point guard in the 2017 NBA that can actually shoot. And Ben Simmons was getting hype around that time. I'm sorry, you're out of your goddamn mind. I think the Cade Cunningham discourse has gotten absolutely puzzling, and it drives me insane. Not because genuinely at this point, covering the Pistons, being around the Crews as much as I have, I can say I started out as a big Pistons fan. At this point, I feel more emotionally neutral towards the team as a fan. I just more so am someone who's so into this world that it's like something that I'm just kind of in now. But I will never not, and this is me saying this, I'm a huge fan of Cade Cunningham's game, and I can't really see how someone can't be, despite the fact that he has been given horrible roster construction after horrible roster construction. He has had 3 different head coaches now in 4 seasons, and really he has only played 3 full seasons, and he has had a different head coach each season. The last one was playing Killian Hayes for half of the season until he was literally forced to take him out of the lineup. You have had Bojan Bogdanovic as his most consistent veteran. He has not had a single point guard on this team, on a Detroit Pistons basketball team, that has been able to say, oh, this is where I was, do X, Y, and Z. And, he hasn't had any form of leadership, mentorship, and true development that any other young player gets. Every other young player gets like their hand held and taken along this road of like, okay, you're going to become a star. Luka Doncic had Dirk, Zion Williamson, even, like, granted, he hasn't, you talk about potential, hasn't been able to live up to his potential yet because of health. Zion Williamson came into the league. JJ Redick was on his team year 1. Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball, Drew Holiday. Who has Cade Cunningham had? And I know people want to go on this whole thing about, oh, well, you can't talk about like the team he has because, that's taking away accountability from Cade. But I'm sorry, no player going into year 4 of their career should be talked about like prime LeBron James when it comes to carrying teams. I'm so sorry. That's just not how discourse works. Like, there's so few players in the recent memory that have had the history that Cade has, where they come out of it stronger. Like Devin Booker is like a diamond in the rough. You know what I mean? Like the fact that he is where he is now compared to like the trenches that the Suns had him in is a true testament to how good Devin Booker is. And I put Cade Cunningham in that same level where he's been in the trenches the last few years. He has been through, in my opinion, like some of the worst teams that he could possibly be given. He has not been put, objectively, not been put in positions to win basketball games. He has not been in positions for his skill set to be used to its fullest potential. He has been in positions where rather than thriving, he has to survive on the NBA court. I mean, for Alec Burks was his saving grace for a lot of times. And that's no disrespect to Alec Burks, but Alec Burks is a bench player on the New York Knicks now. He is not even their 6th most important player. And he was like probably the 2nd or 3rd most important player for the Pistons the last few years. I cannot say to people, and this drives me insane, how good Cade Cunningham is compared to the positions that he has been put in. He has had 3, and I've already said this, 3 different head coaches in 3 full seasons of basketball. What guidance has he had? What leadership has he had? What example has he had to follow in the last few years that has actually given him some sort of anything to build on? Jeremy Grant he had for a year, and like half of it was spent figuring out who should have the ball more.
Yeah.
It's blown my mind, the talk on Cade Cunningham, because coming into the league, he was seen as, oh, he's the next jumbo point guard. He's the next Luka Doncic, Jason Tatum, all these other things. And now you have guys like this NBA whatever baby dude on Twitter talking about how if this was 2017, would be seen as a good player. I'm sorry, if this was 2017 and you were talking about like a 6'3" point guard who has a rough 3-point shot but can drive well, yeah, sure, he would fit in perfectly in 2017. You put Cade Cunningham into any other era and he stands out. I'm so mind blown at the discourse, and I'm really hoping that for no other reason besides Cade, I hope the Pistons can actually make a step in terms of competitiveness this year, because the talk around him has genuinely like I've lost my mind. I feel like I'm in a whole other world than most other people, just because you see like him putting up 44-point game after 40-point game and then 30-point game, and he is giving it his complete all, and he gets blamed for this type of situation. This isn't football. And I think people talk about it like it is, like he's a quarterback and he's basically in charge of the offense. I'm sorry, even in the NFL, you need a good offensive line or else your quarterback doesn't mean shit.
Yeah,
So it's just, yeah.
Like I'm with you, and Organic Lindo had a really good comment, and I think it actually relates to like what you were saying. And he commented similar to his rookie year, Cade and the Pistons stunk up the joint to start the season, and the mainstream and casuals tuned out after that. And I think that is just a really good assessment by him, because to your point, when the Pistons won the lottery, everyone's just like, yeah, Cade is going to be this guy to really turn the franchise around. And his situation doesn't really determine the success that he's had, because he's still produced with all-time just terrible spacing last year, 22, 7.5, couple boards a game. Like, he was still producing. And to your point, I think a lot of people, like casual people, that don't get to tune in to the Detroit Pistons, they're just not as high on Cade, is because the wins haven't really translated yet. But we know the type of player he is. We know that you can build a team around him. I've said I think he's the easiest player. His archetype is probably the easiest player in the NBA to build around. You just need some shooters, role players, and some defenders, and you have a good basketball team. But the previous regime really couldn't figure that out. They were just really obsessed with centers and ping pong balls for whatever reason. I don't know why, but I think this season, if he starts winning games, I think the discourse will completely just flip. Like, I don't think people are gonna like go on the internet and say, oh, Paolo's better than Cade Cunningham. Like, I just don't really think that's going to be the case.
It's insane, because and this isn't even hate towards Paolo. I like Paolo. I've been a fan of his since he was at Duke. I don't see how he is a better NBA player than Cade Cunningham at this point, but the talk he gets as a all-star, and as the all they average identical stats. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
what are we doing here at the end of the day? It blows my mind. I don't understand the Cade Cunningham discourse. I haven't for a while. I understand he had a slow start to his rookie season coming off of that ankle injury, but I feel like ever since then he's kind of been on go. And then he got injured again, and then it took I think maybe like a few games. Honestly, even game 1 against Miami last year, he came out swinging. Yeah. It's just it's really hard to put any blame on Cade Cunningham for, like, I would say of the last few years, the two players I just never have understood like the slander they get is Isaiah Stewart and Cade Cunningham. Those are two players that have continuously improved year after year after year, with no true guidance, no true like, hey, like, this is what you got to do. Like, having someone really take them under their wing. They haven't had any of that. They haven't even learned from winning. They have lost consistently and have only continued to improve. It's just, I don't know, man.
The Isaiah Stewart thing, I have a theory why fans are hard on him, and I respect our beat reporters immensely. I have some that do come on this podcast from time to time. I think some of the articles they wrote over the past 4 seasons, they kind of overrated him in a sense of where the fans think, oh, this is a guy that can be an all-star, stuff like that. And then when he doesn't produce in the fans' like lens, their perspective, then they're like, well, why is this beat reporter telling me this is going to be like the next, Paul Millsap or Al Horford? Like, this guy's not going to be that. This guy's like a role player. He's going to be a backup center or a stretch 4 if you need him to be a stretch 4. I think that's why Isaiah Stewart gets some hate. It's kind of like the beat reporters in the city, I believe, kind of overrated him to start his career, and maybe that's why he gets so much just kind of slander.
That's possible. I feel like, in my opinion, I feel like he gets a lot of flack more than anything because his game isn't aesthetically pleasing to a lot of people. You talk about hooper basketball player, he's not like a hooper where it's gonna like he's gonna be, you know, James Harden double step back, you know what I mean, or like Kyrie with the handles or anything like that. Like he plays mean bully ball basketball, right? Like that's just the type of game he plays in. I have a soft spot for that because back when I played, that was the type, you know, that was my type of basketball. But I think a lot of basketball discourse ultimately comes down to aesthetics, and I feel like that's something that a lot of people don't end up talking about. I do think the beat may have had a factor there where maybe fans had different expectations, but I think a lot of it also just comes down to aesthetics.
I know my neighbor has a theory because like he'll watch the podcast from time to time, and I want to give a shout out to Corey who's on the beat, and he's like, does Isaiah Stewart like shake those guys down because they will not say anything bad about him? I was like, no, dude, he's a nice guy. He's like, you don't think he's just like, you know, pop a reporter in the face if they said something? I was like, no, he wouldn't do that. Like, it's like he's a really nice guy. He's like, I don't know, man. He's like, they won't say. He's like, no one will say anything, not even the 97-1 guys, and they're always negative. I was like, no, man. Like Isaiah Stewart is just a nice guy. Like you got to stay off Reddit. Like stay off Reddit because that is such a Reddit conspiracy theory. Like,
nah, man, he's genuinely just a cool dude. Like being around him, he's just a cool person to be around. It's and I can guarantee you though, there has been cool people to be around on the Pistons that still get a lot of slander from the beat guys, from the 97-1 guys. It doesn't really play a factor here. It's just the fact there hasn't been much to complain about when it comes to Isaiah Stewart. Like the team as a whole, there's been a lot, but I just feel like him and Cade are two guys that have continuously improved.
Yeah, I mean, I understand maybe from a casual or an outsider perspective that they don't get to watch. Like if you were to watch the Detroit Pistons just maybe once a month and Cade has a bad game, your perception of him, I think, would be completely different if you watch the Pistons three times a week. And maybe that's how people on Twitter are. Maybe they saw some highlights of him and they just weren't impressed. I think once the Pistons win more games, they'll be on national TV more, and people will get to see how special this player is. Me and you both know how special of a player he is. Like I've always said, he's the best draft pick since Grant Hill. Like to me, that's how high I view him. And Grant Hill is the reason why I'm a Detroit Pistons fan. He's the reason why I love the Detroit Pistons and what he did. You know, his first couple of years in the league, like guy was special. And I kind of think Cade in the same light to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully it doesn't end the same as it did with Grant. Just because the talent there versus the recognition he gets are very, very, very distant. And I hope Cade is honestly, like truly, I do hope that Cade is able to win meaningful basketball games here in Detroit because I think the fan base, I think he both deserves it.
Yeah, same here. I think Isaiah Stewart and Cade and, you know, Jaden Ivey and Asar and all those, and Jalen Duren, like every player on this roster, really nice guy. I just think that this course, casual, you know, the mainstream media, because they haven't won a lot of games, and I can't really, you know, fault them for having those opinions because like I wasn't the highest on Devin Booker when the Suns were in the lottery every year, but I don't really think people had that same kind of like you know, thoughts and opinions on Book when they were, you know, just botching lottery picks. It just kind of seems like Cade gets a little bit of unfair criticism, and it's not really his fault, like you mentioned.
It's not, and I'm excited for it to end. As that's where I'll end that. I'm excited for the current Cade discourse to end.
Yeah, same here, Alex. We have one more topic, and then we'll wrap this up. So the Pistons have made a few training camp deals, and I thought this would be a fun question. So I think I have pulled up. Yeah, I do have them pulled up. So the 5 training camp guys is Deron Sebron. We actually have a LeBron on our team. Devon Higgs, Sam Peake, Tolu Smith, and Javante McCoy. So my question to you is, which one of these guys could you see getting that final 2-way spot?
It's hard to say because Remind me how to say the first name.
I gotta pull it up again. Deron Sebron.
Deron Sebron. I'm aware of him. He spent some time on the Pelicans, spent some time on their G League. I think on paper probably has the best shot to get that spot, especially with the Trajan connection. But I wouldn't be surprised if that spot went to Devon Higgs. He was someone who came in last year with the Crews kind of halfway through and kind of really immediately kind of found his groove on the team. And he's still pretty young. And he seems to be a guy that gets along with everybody, which is a big deal. But if you're talking about two-way, that's ultimately you're talking about potential. And I think it's going to end up being between the two. I think if there is some sort of training camp battle, it'll be between the two of them. I expect all five of them to spend time with the Crews, regardless. Those are all guys that I'm expecting to see in Wayne State Fieldhouse come November. But it's hard to say now, but if I had to go with one, I'd go with Higgs, but I wouldn't be surprised if it went the other way as well, just because there's a lot of and it goes down to the thing with they already have Denise Jenkins on their team who plays that point guard role. So are they going to give another one to another guard, or is it going to go to Devon Higgins, who's more of a wing? You know what I mean? It's we'll see. I would go with Higgs though for now.
Yeah, I think I texted you because I actually watched 2 games of Deron Sebron with the squadron, and I'm watching him and I'm like, reminded me a lot of Jared Rhoden. They have very similar skill sets, but I think the one thing with him that separates is just the open court and his ability to just attack the basket, like finishing with either hand. But I think a dark horse for me is going to be Tolu Smith, because you never know. Injuries happen. He was on the summer league roster, and when he was locked in, he did a pretty good job of rebounding, crashing the glass, defending. There was definitely some bright spots with Tolu Smith, but if I had to put my money on it right now, I think it's between Sebron or Tolu Smith. But it wouldn't surprise me, to your point, like Higgs came in, to your point, just I think it was backing up Xavier Simpson, if I do remember correctly, wasn't he?
He was. He played, I think, legitimately, I want to say he played anywhere like 1 through 3.
Yeah.
But that's also pretty common with the Crews the last few years, is like there's a lot of guys who kind of just play that 1 through 3 position. Jared Rhoden spent some time at point guard the last couple of years. I'm sure Sebron will as well. If he is on the team, I'm sure he will spend time with the Crews regardless. But it'll be interesting. I think Sebron has a lot of flash to his game that will be something that I'm sure the Crews marketing team will absolutely love. But I just say Higgs just because he plays that kind of crafty wing role. And yes, the Pistons do already have some wings, but when you already have a point guard on that type of two-way deal, like is it going to go to another, or like are you going to have 2 competing point guards? Or you could have Sebron kind of play just a general guard position as well. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, I believe Tosan Awoma is still one of the 2-way guys, and then you have Dennis Jenkins, which, yeah, to your point, like, do you want to have competition? Because they didn't really address backup point guard, but I think everyone's just assuming that it's either going to be Sasser or Ivy. We're just going to have to wait and see what happens with the preseason, because I think we'll get a better indication of like what the rotations could possibly be going into the season. But
for sure,
wouldn't surprise me if they did give the final 2-way spot to a guard. But I think a lot of people that they're really rooting for Tolu Smith. Like I usually, and I know you can relate to this, players have support systems. Like they have friends. Bro, I literally had his pastor reach out. I had posted a graphic. I didn't get a chance to post it on Instagram. He screenshotted my graphic and then he posted it, and then he DM'd me. He's like, I hope you don't mind. I was like, his support system, I love to see it, man. It's so damn big. Like,
that's
cousins,
amazing.
aunts, uncles, pastors, like mechanics in his city. Like they're all rooting for him to make an NBA team.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to watch and be a part of the Crews. Be around the Crews, not part of the Crews. Let me see him suit up real quick. No, be around the Crews again this year. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting storylines, and I think there's a lot of guys with potential to kind of be those fringe NBA guys, if not, be around that type of level. I think this is probably the most talent they've had since the 2021 like inaugural season. So it'll be interesting, like I said, and I'm rooting. I'm always, reporter, objective, whatever, yes, but I'm always rooting for the guys. Like anytime that they get those two-way contracts, anytime they get NBA minutes, it's really always rewarding to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bobby Klitman may or may not be like on that Cruz team, like maybe a couple games here, a couple games there. But I mean, I think both of our draft picks could possibly spend time in the G, and I think a lot of Pistons fans would probably come out to Wayne State and just watch them. And I'm happy they kept Jamel McMillan around because I really liked him as a coach.
Agreed. Yeah, he was great last year. Like I remember very early on being so impressed by not only like how he carries himself, but how he's around the players, how the players respond to him, just how he adapts to things during games, and just like how much of a player's coach he is. I was super impressed by Jamil, and I really do think, and I wrote this before, I do think it'll be a matter of time before Jamil is on NBA benches as like assistant coaches, and I think at one point in his career, Jamil McMillan will be an NBA head coach. Absolutely.
I thought he was going to replace Monty personally. Like I didn't see JB Bickerstaff in our future because I thought the Cavs were just going to keep him because kind of just looked up like what he did in Cleveland, and they got better each and every year. But I mean, there was a point that the Crews were like a top 3 team in their conference, and like they were competing, they were rebounding, defending, but they had injuries and they had other teams poaching their players. But I mean, I love him as a coach. I thought he did a really good job last year.
Yeah, shout out to Jonte Porter. I was so impressed by him, and I thought it was such a fumble by the Pistons not being able to keep him. But in the end, did not matter there.
He would have been a lot richer. I'm just telling you that.
If I was a betting man, I would not have bet on the Pistons losing on Jonte Porter. Let me tell you, I would have bet on a lot of other things, but not. Yeah, God, that was unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say it was Laz. Shout out to him. We're talking about like Jonte, and he's like, "You can't bet on G League games, can you?" I was like, "No, I don't think so." He's like, "Oh, maybe that's why he was trying so hard to get out of the G League." I was like, "Oh, maybe, I don't know."
True parlay warrior,
literally. But I appreciate you coming on. I know you said you had to be somewhere, or people coming home. I don't remember, but I do want to give you the floor to plug yourself, plug Realbullyball, because I know it's something that you're really passionate about, and you work on. You talked about a website last time you were on, but like you want to tell the people where they can find you and where they can support you.
Yeah, like always. First of all, always appreciate you having me on. Truly, always is a pleasure coming on here. And yeah, Bullyball is my media group. It is a YouTube. We have a YouTube, we have Twitch, we have Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, you name it, we're on there. And then we also have our website, www.bullyball.net, which will be transitioning to our Substack pretty soon, which I had mentioned last time I was on here. Lately we've been doing a lot of Tigers content, just because the Gritty Tigs are a thing, and they are currently playoff bound. So we'll see.
I think you muted yourself. You're still muted. Oh, there we go.
I meant to volleyball here. But anyways, the world doesn't want me talking about the Gritty Tigs. I was getting silenced. But yeah, the Tigers have been on a run, and that's been really fun to watch, and we've been covering a lot of that. But pretty soon here we'll be doing a lot more Pistons coverage. I just posted some archive Pistons photography I did last year, Pistons and Crews photography I did last year, so I'll be covering both. We also will be doing some sort of college sports coverage pretty soon here. Stay tuned. And I have a couple articles in the chamber that right now that I'm waiting to get going around like media day time in a week or so. So it's a lot going on, and I'm excited for the season to start back up. And we will be at Realbullyball. Just come hang out with us.
Awesome. Well, I do have, I don't think I have every social media platform for Real Bullyball, but I do have your Twitter and I think Real Bullyball's Twitter down below in the description, so people can just click the link and follow you guys there. But appreciate you coming on, man. I know it was kind of last minute. I was dragging my feet all week. It was just a really long week for me, honestly. It's just it's I know busy season's coming and I'm dreading it.
Yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready for it, but I also am like my gas tank. I don't know if it's ready for it. So I don't know. I'm excited though to get back in the swing of things.
Same here, man. Well, we'll see you guys next week. Hope you guys are having a good day. And